All right, we're back. Johnny Tremain by Esther Forbes. And we're in chapter 5, section 2. Oops. Illustrated by Lynd Ward. Love those at the beginning of each chapter. They're terrific. Published by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. Oh, and become a subscriber. Click subscribe. It's right there. It's like right there on the bottom. And you can get updates. I mostly do math videos, but I'm going to finish recording this book for all the absent students who don't get to read it in class. And if you don't have a copy of the book, then I can try to help you understand it. And I still think you should have your own copy. I think everybody should have a copy of this one. It is a classic. So, Johnny, his lawyer told him, right here, Mr. Quincy told him to watch out for himself because Mr. Light was a very proud man. Okay, and that pride had been hurt. So now he's Johnny's enemy. So what does Johnny do? He says, well, I'm going to go try to get money from Mr. Light for this cup that matches his set. Oh my gosh, and I'm just groaning the whole time. Like, don't do it. Go to Mr. Revere. And of course, Mr. Light accuses him still of thieving it, and he has his clerks that are, quote, witnesses of this, and so Johnny has to run away without his cup. And he stops at the Boston Observer, and now he literally has nothing. He doesn't even have his cup. So he has asked to be a delivery boy for the Boston Observer, and Rab is always calm, cool, and collected. And he says, yes, Johnny can sleep in the loft with me. And that's really moving up for Johnny because he had to share a bed with Dove and Dusty, and now he only has to share with Rab. So this is moving up in the world. So Johnny's new life had begun. Section 2. What's the matter with Goblin? Johnny asked a little nervously. Mr. Loren doesn't seem to hold him by much. Well, said Rab mildly, if you can ride Goblin, you can really ride. After him, anything will seem easy. But that's a good way to learn. Now remember, Johnny, there's not such a lot to riding except getting along with your horse. Horses are timid animals at heart, but Goblin's the most timid of all. Has he been treated badly? Yes, whipped because he's so timid. I got interested in him out in Lexington where my folks live. He had 4 owners in 1 year. Each time he was sold, he went for half price. The last owner practically gave him to me. He's not mean nor a bully. He's as sweet and gentle an animal as you'll ever find. A piece of paper blowing in the street might make any horse shy, and he's ashamed of himself the next moment. But Goblin doesn't ever stop to see what it is. He thinks maybe it's a little white dog about to bite his heels, and he jumps out of his skin and leaves. Sometimes it takes half an hour to quiet him again. As for clothes on the line, they aren't just shirts and petticoats. He thinks they are white hippogriffs big enough to carry horses off in their talons. From his point of view, the only sensible thing is to get moving, and he moves pretty fast. Now, what you've got to do is to get his confidence so completely he'll know you'll never let anything hurt him. You can't do that by whipping him. Then he'll go through hell, a laundry yard from his point of view, for you. But I don't know how to ride. It's about like dancing, keeping rhythm. You'll learn right off. Of course, you'll be scared, but just remember this. No matter how scared you are, he's more so. They were entering the Afric Queen's stable. The horseboy who has been riding him for us has made him worse and worse. If I had time, I could get his confidence and cure him somewhat. Nobody could make him safe and steady. Now, you just look at him. Isn't he a beauty? Rab had gone into one of the many stalls and backed out a tall, slender horse so pale he was almost white, but flecked all over with tiny brown marks. The mane and tail were a rich, blackish mahogany. His eyes were a glassy blue. Rab said, "I never saw a horse his color before. His sire was Yankee Hero, a white horse, fastest horse I ever saw run. Narragansett breed. We could no more afford to own one of Yankee Hero's sons than we could the Light's coach, unless there was some little thing wrong with him. Eh, goblin?" The beautiful, wild, timid thing breathed softly, caressingly at Rab, but at the same time the queer, crystalline eyes watched Johnny as though sure that this was a boy who ate horses. "Now, you put on a bridle like this, see? And when winter comes, don't ever put a cold bit in a horse's mouth. Breathe on it first. The saddle blanket. Steady, steady, goblin. It won't hurt you. And then the saddle. Now you lead him out in the yard. You hold the reins like this. Left hand always, and the thumb on the upper side, but down on the reins. And you put your left foot in the stirrup. If you get on from the right side and get kicked, it serves you right. There, see how easy? On and off, just like that. You hold him a second." Rab went into the tavern, and when he came back, he had permission to take out the landlady's genteel nag. Nag is another horse, like an older one. With Johnny on the nag and Rab on Goblin, they went to the common. And remember, common from our social studies vocabulary is like the common area in the middle of town. They used to have animals that would graze there, kind of an open green area, lots of grass. Here were acres upon acres of meadow and cow pasture, hard ground cleared for the drilling of militia. The sun and the wind swept through them. Trees were turned to scarlet. Remember, it's fall, autumn. Scarlet, gold, beefy red. Blueberry bushes to crimson. Through one patch, a white cow was plodding, seemingly up to her belly in blood. It's not blood, it's the red color of the leaves. The cold, wild air was like wine in the veins, and across the vast blue sky, white clouds hurried before the wind like sheep before invisible wolves. Ooh, when you use like and as to compare, that's a simile. "Easy, easy," cried Rab. "Easy does it." Goblin had been cavorting, blowing through his nostrils, begging to be let out like you want to run, you just want to go. Rab kept him at a close canter. The landlady's sorrel flung himself after him. Now and then Rab would glance behind to see how Johnny was making out. "Not so stiff, give more. I said keep your thumb up." Then they would stop a moment, Rab making Johnny mount and dismount. "Trot him from that stump yonder, back again to me." Once again, both in the saddle, and he was setting a faster pace. The two horses tore across the packed earth of the drill ground, and for the first time in his life, Johnny heard that wonderful music, galloping hoofs on hard earth. Oh, I love this. Like that. So awesome. At the end, when Goblin had got most of the play out of him, they changed horses. Actually, Goblin's gaits were so smooth he seemed easier than the sorrel. Johnny felt he had learned a lot in his first lesson. A few more, and he would have had no fear of Goblin. But there were no more lessons. Rab was too busy. He was teaching Johnny to ride as he did everything else, with a minimum expenditure of his own energy. Every day Johnny led Goblin to the common, for it was quite a long time before he dared ride him through the narrow, crowded streets, and he sat in his manger and talked to him. Remember, like Rab said, you need to show that you care, become friends. The idea that Goblin was more scared than he gave him great confidence, and so did Rab's belief in him and his powers to learn. He had always been quick on his feet, rhythmic, and easy in his motions. He had no idea that learning to ride by himself, with a notoriously bad horse for one instructor and a boy who never left his printing press for the other, he was doing an almost impossible thing. But one day he overheard Uncle Lawrence say to Rab, "I don't see how Johnny has done it, but he is riding real good now." "He's doing all right. Not scared a bit of Goblin. God knows I am. Johnny Tremain is a bold fellow. I knew he could learn, if he didn't get killed first. It was sink or swim for him, and happens he's swimming." This praise went to Johnny's head, of course, because he has that arrogance in him, but patterning his manners on Rab's, he tried not to show it. He is finally learning. He is learning from someone who is setting an excellent example. He tried not to show it. It's like, oh, what? You're going to try to be humble? Finally? Good. For the first week, Uncle Lorne did hire the landlady's gentle nag for Johnny. Even with the lists and maps Rab made for him, those 3 days of delivering papers, first through Boston, then circling out through the surrounding towns, and returning Saturday night by ferry from Charlestown, were confusing enough. Soon, however, these 3 days of riding became a delight to him. He was a town boy, knowing little of country ways. The ships in the harbor he knew, the wharves and the world of shops and trade. Now he reveled in broad harvest fields, orange pumpkins, shocked corn, frost-touched grapes, and the towns clustering around Boston interested him. He liked to make a handsome entrance. Even if he and Goblin had dawdled a bit on country roads, they both liked arriving at the inns at a gallop. So again, okay, coming in fast. Then Johnny would bustle in with his newspapers and often find the subscribers already sitting about the tap room waiting for him. Because he came from Boston and rode for the Observer, he was often questioned about the political thinking at the Capitol. By reading the papers, talking to Rab and Uncle Lorne, listening to the leaders of opposition about Boston, he quickly became well informed. In only a few weeks, he changed from knowing little enough about the political excitement and caring less to being an ardent Whig. He also enjoyed the showy, queer beauty of his horse. When people on the streets or at the taverns complimented him on his mount, there would come the same fatuous expression on his face he had often ridiculed on Scylla's when people stopped her and said how angelic Isana was. But he did not know it. So remember when people would stop and say, "Oh my gosh, what an angel she is. She's so beautiful." He's riding Goblin and people say, "Oh, what a beautiful horse." And then he doesn't know it, but his face is all like, "Yeah, I know, I'm super proud of him." At first, he fell off fairly often, and it would take him half an hour to catch the wary animal. But once a farmer's wife gave him his hat full of bad apples, and he lured Goblin easily. After that, he always stuffed his pockets with windfalls. That means extra apples. A windfall is anything that's like extra of anything, extra. If Goblin would approach something he feared, Johnny rewarded him with a specked apple. But when he did fall off, he would come home smelling like a cider press because he's landing on the apples and then smush, and then he's got smashed apples all in his pockets. The boys shared the loft above the printing shop. It was reached only by a ladder, but was large, comfortable, and had a big fireplace. There was one odd thing about this attic that was the number of chairs stored there. He started to ask Rab why this was, but thought better of it, and at last Rab told him. It was here in the attic, ever and anon, that means every once in a while, the Boston Observers met. It was a secret club, as powerful as any in Boston, and here in the last few years had been hatched much treason, as the Tories called it, Rab did not even tell Johnny to keep his mouth shut. He knew he would. Breakfast they made for themselves. Dinner was sent over by Mrs. Loren. Supper they either got for themselves or ate at Aunt and Uncle's. Rab's aunt was a plump, red-headed, white-skinned woman. She must have been a variation of a well-known family pattern, for Johnny often heard people say, as they looked at Rab, "That boy is a regular Silsby from Lexington." Well, if he was, then she was not, but her 8-month-old son was. He was the longest baby Johnny had ever seen, had the straightest black hair, cried the least, and ate the fastest. Never fussed, and watched the world through enigmatic, questioning, dark eyes. Even Uncle Loren, who might have preferred that his only child should have repeated the fox-like scholarly brightness of his own face, admitted as he looked thoughtfully at his baby, "That child of yours, Jennifer, is a regular Silsby of Lexington." Johnny became absorbed in Goblin. He was afraid the stable boys at the Afric Queen struck at him, bullied him because he was timid, so he took upon himself the feeding and care of the animal. This saved Mr. Loren a few pennies a week on the board bill, and he generously gave the money to Johnny. The landlord at the Queen liked the boy. When guests wished a letter delivered faster than the dawdling post riders, he would recommend Johnny. So once that fall, he rode as far as Worcester and again to Plymouth. This money was divided between the owner of the horse and the rider, and Johnny bought himself spurs, boots, and a fur-lined surtout, all second-hand. Although Johnny held the reins in his left hand as Rab had taught him, many times as the horse was off on a wild tear and he was struggling to get him once more under control, he was forced to use his crippled hand. He could not keep it proudly in his pocket while careening about on a horse like Goblin. Although too badly injured ever to be skillful again, it was no longer in danger of atrophying as it had been in Johnny's pocket. As that means he has to use it. He's got to be flexing it and opening it and closing it. Even if his skin did grow together here, he needs to be able to use it. And the more you use it, the better you get. As a silversmith, he had already learned to use his left hand a certain amount. Rab never said to him, "Now, Johnny, you've got to learn to write with your left hand." But he would give him things to copy, take it for granted that he could, and he did. For the first 4 days of every week, Johnny was his own master. Remember when Uncle Loren had said, "You can continue with your learning"? He spent his time exercising his horse, unless he got an order to ride express for the Afric Queen, in learning to write with his left hand, and an orgy of reading. That's a lot of reading. Mr. Loren had a fine library. It was as if Johnny had been starved before and never known it. He read anything, everything, bound back copies of The Observer, Paradise Lost, Robinson Crusoe. Oh, I had to read Paradise Lost because, English major. That's a tough one. John Milton. Old English. Robinson Crusoe, which you know from The Sign of the Beaver, a little bit about that. Once more, for that was one of the books Rab had brought him to read in jail. Tom Jones and Locke's Essays on Human Understanding, Hutchinson's History of Massachusetts Bay, Chemical Essays, Spectator papers, books on midwifery, and manners for young ladies. Really anything. Pope's Iliad. It was a world of which he never had guessed while living with the Laphams, because remember the Laphams would only have the Bible. And now he remembered with gratitude how his mother had struggled to teach him so that this world might not be forever closed to him. How she had made him read to her when he would rather have been playing. Poor woman. Her books had been few and mostly dull. So he sat for hours in the Lorens' sunny parlor, the books about him stretching to the ceiling. Mrs. Loren never called to him to help her in the kitchen. She, Uncle Lauren, and Rab all took it for granted that Johnny ought to read. Mrs. Lapham could not have borne the sight of so idle a boy. But Aunt Lauren never interrupted him, except to come in now and then with a plate of hot gingerbread or seed cakes, and once in a long time ask him if he would mind Baby as she went out marketing or visiting. The little 8-month-old baby, so he's like a babysitter. I'll just put Baby in his cradle here, and if he doesn't go right to sleep, you rock him a little with your foot. The first time he read Tom Jones, he got so excited he absent-mindedly rocked Baby for half an hour. But even this did not upset that regular Soulsby of Lexington. The baby gulped a little, but took it philosophically, just like Rab. Secretly, and only when alone, Johnny began calling him Rabbit. It was easy for him to love, and he loved the baby. He would have died before he would have let anyone guess he was so simple, but Aunt Lauren knew. Sometimes she would come into the kitchen quietly and hear Johnny holding long, one-sided conversations with Rabbit. When she came into the room where he was with the child, he would merely say scornfully, "Aunt Lauren, I think it is wet," and pretend to be lost in his book. Then she would feel so fond of the lonely boy who never knew he was lonely, and so amused at his pretense of scorn for something he in his heart loved, she could not help but kiss him. She always kissed him where his hair began to grow in the middle of his forehead. He had never known until she told him that he had a widow's peak, which she assured him was a great mark of beauty. It's where your hair grows down more in a V in the middle of your forehead. "Why, I'd give anything for a widow's peak," she would say. "I'd give a plate of cookies." And off she would waddle, for she was tiny-footed and too plump, and come back with the cookies. Johnny thought Rab was lucky to have an aunt like that. And that's the end of section 2. So become a subscriber, click subscribe, and find out what happens in the next section.